Hello, this is Will Schlecht from IronCrow AI, and today I'm going to be giving a demo of some additional capabilities we've added to the search tab. In particular, we've added the ability to send prosecution history files for US applications to different tabs. So if you've watched the first video on how the search tab works, you will know that you can use this tab to search for US applications using Open Data Portal, as well as European applications. And you can also search using semantic, basically claim similarity. So as an extension to what the US application search is able to do, we can now send prosecution history files. So those would be files which you could find in the image file wrapper associated with those applications. So to start with, let's perform a simple search. So first make sure that our search type is using the Open Data Portal. And we're going to search for 3 applications examined by a particular examiner in which an appeal was filed and which were either eventually granted or abandoned. And so the reason I want to add whether they were granted or abandoned is because I want to actually make sure that there is a complete appeal, because just for the example, it's more interesting if there's more than just an appeal brief that was filed. So I want these applications to have reached final disposition. So we will search for that term. And again, it's just nice being able to use the search tab using natural language instead of having to, figure out where I would need to put examiner name and where I would need to filter for things that were abandoned or patented. So we've got our 3 results because we only asked for 3, and we can just do a quick check. Yep, this is the examiner that we were interested in. And in this case, this application was eventually granted as a patent. So let's select these 3 search results and send. So up until this point, everything's the same as I think in the initial demo video for the search tab. But where things are different is we now offer an overview. So this is the prosecution history overview file. You can send this information to the various tabs like the interrogation context tab, draft content, or draft style. So we'll select that. And also you can select the prosecution history. And the prosecution history is a lot more complicated than some of these other things. So the earliest publication or granted patent, those are single documents, right? That's one file, basically. And as it's the same for the overview. The overview is basically a kind of special file that we create that gives an overview of what's happening with that application. That's useful if you want to have an overview of like the prosecution timeline, how long it took an application to get granted, or what the attorneys were that were working on that application, kind of general overarching questions that relate to applications, you can use the overview document. But prosecution history can consist of hundreds of documents sometimes and many different types of documents. So we have a default list or set of prosecution file types that we will select, but you can customize these by clicking select, what was the button name? By clicking select documents, you can customize these. So you can quickly either select or unselect all of the different prosecution history file types. And in this case, the example I want to show is really just about appeals. So let's start by unselecting everything. And we've grouped these documents in categories to make things a little bit easier, because there really are many different types of documents. So we want to select all of the appeal documents. So let's just click all of those, and that looks good. So once you've selected the types of prosecution history documents, select a destination. So we're going to send this to interrogate, which is pretty much the tab that is good to use for general purpose research, but also for prosecution. And this seems like a prosecution related example. So we'll submit. and it will now process each of those documents that we selected in each of these applications and send those to the interrogation tab. The context, so all of the files that this interrogation tab kind of has in its brain, in its memory, they are all here. What we have is the application number and then the name of each of these files. So you can see we've got the appeal brief for application 14/28/1492, and it's got the date that that was filed. So we can, in this case, let's just keep everything selected, even though that's very many different files. Actually, we will uncheck the overview documents because in this case, I'm not really interested in the overall prosecution history. I'm just interested in the outcomes of these appeals. And then let's ask a simple question about these appeals. So let's ask, to please summarize the provided appeal documents and was the examiner reversed or affirmed in these appeals? I think that's a pretty natural question that people are going to have if you have an examiner and you want to assess your likelihood of succeeding in an appeal. You would probably start with just checking, how often has this examiner been um, confirmed or reversed in their different appeals. So based on reviewing the provided appeal documents, there are two separate appeals. There's application from 2005 and application from 2010. These appeals involved claims related to metal silicates. The board reversed the examiner's anticipation of rejection of claims. Okay, so cool. The examiner was reversed in this case. And for the second application, the appeal involves claims 1 through 34. The board found that the examiner erred in rejecting claims 1 through 4, et cetera, et cetera. So in both appeals, the board reversed the examiner's rejections and ruled in favor of the appellants. So that's good. It looks like one of the documents also referenced application 14, but the final outcome of that appeal is not clearly indicated in the provided documents. So let's just have it kind of focus in on just the 14 application. Let's see if we can get more information. So one limitation of the fact that the search tab is able to send tons of different documents to the various windows. You could really easily send several hundred documents to these windows, and that is a lot. So there does need to be, I think, some intelligent uh, kind of focusing on which areas, which documents are relevant. You don't want to just send everything. But if you do have a ton of documents and you don't want to spend the time to figure out which ones are kind of relevant for what you're interested in, you can always use the agent mode, which is much better. It's kind of designed for these larger tasks over many, many different files. And when you select the agent mode, it will actually choose which files to look at, and it can look at files one by one or in sets and do different kinds of actions on those files. So I actually think when it comes to reviewing prosecution history files, using the agent mode is particularly useful when you want a kind of like an overall report or analysis of those prosecution documents. When you want to just find a specific needle in a haystack kind of answer, you don't need to use the agent mode. So for example, if you just want to see what happened in the most recent office action for a case, you can just get those office actions and select just those files, and it's pretty simple. But for something like this, where we're reviewing 3 different applications and many different complicated documents, each of those documents being pretty large, using the agent mode might be preferred. So here we have a summary of the appeal for the 14/28 application. Let's see if the examiner was reversed or affirmed. So the board did reverse the examiner's rejections, finding that the examiner made no findings regarding how the concentration of hydrogen, uh, little technical specific details there. So again, the examiner was reversed. So there you have it. I think if this was an initial review of this examiner to see if filing an appeal makes sense, we didn't filter for only appeals that were successful or only appeals that were reversed. We just did for any applications which reached final disposition. And in that case, most of those appeals were successful. So it looks like this would probably be a good um, a good examiner to appeal. Let's try another way of searching. Let's see if we can, uh, let's kind of clean our slate here. So let's find more than 3 applications. Let's find, in this case, let's do a larger set. Let's do 20. That's a lot. Let's do 10. Okay. So same search criteria as before. 10 applications is the change, but it's still the same examiner, and we still want applications which have reached a final disposition, either abandoned or granted as patents. So we actually weren't able to find 10. That could be because there just aren't enough applications that have reached final disposition. But let's take the applications that we have, and then let's send just their overviews. Let's send just the overview of these, so the overview file to the interrogation tab. Submit that. That should process a bit faster than last time because we're only sending one file from each of these. What do we have here? 5 applications. Okay. So we can see we've got our overview files for each of those 5 applications. And now I think if you want to do more of a high level analysis of outcomes associated with applications that go to particular art units or particular examiners, I think using these overview files can be helpful. You often don't need all of the granular details that are provided in the individual image file wrapper files that you can access. So let's see, um, for the 5 applications um, summarized in the provided overview files, how many, let's see, in how many was the examiner reversed in an appeal, and in how many was the examiner affirmed? So yeah, this allows you to do lots of different types of search research. So let's see what the answer is in this case. Let me analyze each application's appeal outcomes from the provided documents. So examiner was reversed, affirmed in part for this application, affirmed in part again, and then affirmed in part a third time. And then, yeah, I think it wasn't able to see uh, the fifth overview file. So it actually looks like in these instances, the examiner was affirmed in part quite often. So that might mean we should, let's look at this particular application in more detail. Let's just take one of these as an example. So go to the search tab and please find application number. Search for that. So we can follow up our initial investigation with a more detailed investigation. So we can take this application in which the examiner was affirmed in part, and then let's send all of the appeal documents over to our interrogation tab and see exactly how the examiner was affirmed. Okay, so we've got our appeal documents. So now we can ask a more detailed question about, um, can you summarize in detail what happened in the appeal for application number, let's see, this application. I've probably gone on way too long with this example, but I just want to kind of follow this and sort of show you how the process of research can be iterative. And so, these tools enable that back and forth. So, you do a first investigation, you find a few applications, you see something that's interesting, you want to zoom in on that application, figure out exactly what happened with the appeal. This tab, the search tab and its new ability to get these prosecution documents enables that kind of natural iterative workflow for doing this type of patent prosecution research. So let's see what we've got for this application. So the appeal, let's see, 1, 2, and 10 were under appeal. 3, 4 were allowable. What happened with it? Uh, there was a rejection under 103. We got the arguments by the appellant. I won't really go into those details, but that would be useful if I don't know, if you have a similar rejection and you feel similar arguments apply, it could be particularly helpful to know what the outcome of those arguments were. The board's decision for claim 1 affirmed the examiner's rejection, found the examiner's motivation to combine was reasonable, sufficient, disagreed that the appellant, their argument that benefits of nitridation could not be obtained by combining references. So there was some reversal of the examiner. So reverse the examiner's rejection of 2 and 10. Agreed with the appellant that leave removes the entire polysilicon layer. Okay. And final outcome. So actually, overall, in this case, the examiner was mostly reversed and only affirmed in part. So good to actually zoom in on this application and see what happened specifically. So sorry for the overly long demo, but hopefully that gives you a sense of how to actually use the interrogation tab in conjunction with the search tab and its new prosecution history capabilities. There's really a ton of use cases for this. This is really just scratching the surface. I really haven't even conceived of everything you can do, but I do think it's a really great way to do some research. Say you get a new case and you want to familiarize yourself with it. Maybe it's already somewhere in the middle of the prosecution timeline. You can catch up with, what has happened previously in prosecution really easily using probably the overview file. Or if you want to find some potentially useful arguments in cases that are really similar, this could be particularly useful if you use the semantic search or the claim similarity based search. Say you find there's a really similar application in which the claims were rejected as abstract under 35 USC 101. That could be really helpful to find arguments that either were or were not able to overcome that rejection in that similar type of application, because those arguments are probably going to apply in your case. So just a few examples that I've thought of and used the tool for, but I think it's, a very open-ended tool and you will find additional uses, but exposing all of these prosecution files makes the tool a lot more powerful. And the fact that it combines with all of these pre-existing things, it just means that the synergy kind of explodes exponentially. So as an example of that, you could then you have a conversation history that's looking at prosecution. You could then select the manual of patent examining procedure, which basically makes the LLM Sandbox tool a master of the rules and procedures outlined in the MPEP, and then maybe audit that prosecution history to see if there's any issues with what the examiner's been doing. So just one quick example of how the existing tools that we have, by adding this additional capability to bring in the prosecution history files, it just means that all of those existing features have an additional use. It's kind of a synergistic effect. So lots that you can do. All right. Thank you for your time. Talk to you again later.